I'm not a mother. And I've often wondered over the years if I made a big mistake. And maybe you relate to that. It's been a journey inside me, a lot of struggle, a roller coaster of emotions over the years. No small thing. This is big. And so I'm just going to share my journey with you across the last 44 years and what happened and how I got here. And probably more importantly, the paradigm shifts and changes of perception that I've experienced as I went out on this quest to work out if I was meant to be a mother or not. When I was a kid, I had four younger brothers and sisters, and it was a pretty chaotic household growing up, as you might imagine. I made this decision. When I was 18, I remember quite resolutely confirming that I was not going to have children. I remember proudly declaring it to my family and just feeling right about it. But if I was to be really honest with myself, I had an inner conflict, and that was a part of me envisioned myself as an old lady, a little old lady, because I'm short, on a rocking chair of some sort, surrounded by all my grandchildren, possibly great grandchildren, just imparting wisdom and guidance. And I couldn't resolve this inner conflict, not that I was aware of it at all. As I got into my 20s and even into my 30s, it became more obvious that I had deep wounds and my shadows started to come up everywhere. And probably most obviously were my coping mechanisms to try and push the pain down. I became a high achiever. And with any extreme, I also became a big party animal. I was extreme in two ways. And I didn't know any kind of in between world. It was black and white for me. It was painful to live that way, but it was all I knew how. It was how I coped with things. And so part of that was in my escaping myself and my pain and getting very drunk a lot was a lot of promiscuity. It amazes me that I never got pregnant during that time. I took the morning pill many times. Probably wasn't good for me. I'm sure of that actually. And I think a big part of this was a reaction to a strict religious upbringing and not having the wisdom to understand any of the rules that I was given. It felt like a control over me, and I rebelled. I rebelled. Like anything, if you do anything extreme, you kind of swing to the extreme opposite. And so that presented in my life as promiscuity. And it's pretty easy to get lost in that world when you're also inebriated a lot to cope with all the pain you feel. And so for me, I spent a long time kind of numb and also in a great deal of denial about my own pain. And so it wasn't even on my mind about the future, about thinking about creating a family in the future. Even in my 20s, I just thought that's a long way away. And a part of me, and this really hasn't changed, has always felt this excitement and the happy-go-lucky attitude, a bit of a trust in the flow of life and the adventure of life. And so I wasn't really a big planner about the future. And it's interesting, I remember hearing some science about this. Most people under age 25 are not thinking about the future. The brain hasn't wired that way yet. Consequence. And I just lived day to day and a lot of instant gratification. And that was something I paid for later, definitely. And so I lived through the lens of trauma and my shadows. And it's interesting because now I see that I was really yearning for connection. And the only way I knew how was through this promiscuity. I'd yearned to connect with others. But the thing was, I'd never connected even with my parents growing up, as many of us did not. And I didn't know how to have a relationship with myself. I had no connection with myself. You think about the amount of time I was either working, which was very much a masculine mindset, do, produce, achieve, studying, working, whatever it might have been, or I was partying. So I was abandoning myself and abusing myself, and I wasn't there with me. So I never learned to have a relationship with myself. And so it was easy to abuse myself. It was easy to give myself away in that way physically. And it's scary to think that I even lost my virginity to a total stranger. And I don't even know what they looked like. And that brought a lot of shame for a long time. And shame is one of the things that has been a bit of a pattern in my life. It has controlled my life from a very long time, from being bullied as a child into doing things that weren't really of my essence and of my nature in all areas of life, and using shame to control me. And that became a bit of a hallmark of how I saw myself. And I looked at myself through the lens of shame for so long. As I got into that age where I really yearned to have a proper relationship, I would wear my heart on my sleeve. I didn't understand how to build a relationship because I never had one with myself or my parents. And so when I did meet someone, I just gave all of myself away. And I moved into the familiar pattern of codependency, which later I would learn about when I went to Codependence Anonymous in my 30s. And it's interesting because every new partner that I met would be the one. And I would fall intensely in love and cut people off outside of the relationship completely. And I was in misery in all of these relationships because I lived vicariously through that person. I disowned myself, not that I ever really understood myself anyway, but I lived through their life of preferences and nullified my own. And so this even came to thinking about what I wanted to experience in this life. I never gave myself a chance to even consider what I wanted to experience, like having a family. I just lived through that person I was with. And I would be severely heartbroken over and over again, especially when the relationships would end with feelings of shame again, because I drank too much too often. I embarrassed myself, or I suffered too deeply in my bulimia, which was another thing. And occasionally I would entertain the idea of having a family when I would feel lonely, which I know that now as a fact is not a good reason to have a family. And it really wasn't until my first serious relationship at age 21, so 3 years after I resolutely decided, no, I was definitely not having kids, that I entertained the idea of having a child again. And I didn't really explore it because very quickly that relationship was ending and my heart was breaking. And so I continued using coping mechanisms like escapism through substances and relationships long term and over and over. And I didn't realize that I was slowly becoming more and more closed hearted and building a solid wall around my heart so that I never had to feel it. Just hurt too much. Everything hurt too much. And around this time, I attracted a lot of people into my life. We're talking up to my mid 30s. it got worse and worse, partners. And I still consider myself bisexual because I'm attracted to men and women. However, I tried to stick with the norms of society because I felt a lot of shame for my preferences as well because of my upbringing in a religious household. And that kept me hiding and being very secretive about some of my relationships too. But I always tended to attract people into my world who were reflecting my level of mental and emotional health. And especially at my worst in my mid 30s, where I was really just hedonistic almost because I was in so much pain. And it's really helped me recognize this when I see others who are just appearing to live for the day and want to abuse themselves so much. I have compassion for them because I've been there. And it's not living. It's not living at all. By my mid 30s, I really stepped back and realized that, well, that biological clock is ticking. That's what society was telling me, my culture was telling me. And I thought, oh, I better consider having children. It was more of a should, not a could any. That possibility was a necessity in my mind. And so I went and did all the tests to see if I could because I'd never had any scares. And I looked at my mum had 5 kids, no issues with fertility. And meanwhile, I had absolutely no sign that I was fertile. And it was interesting because the doctor found that I had extreme high egg count. And it turns out that was PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. And at the time I thought, oh, this is good. I probably can have children. And I met this man. We went on our first date and I was really open about it. I said, hey, I would like to have a family. I'd like to get married, a bit traditional, and have kids. And it's interesting because I recognized now that I look back that he was not congruent with that idea. I've learned to use sensory acuity to read some well dripping information, as my mentor used to say. But I didn't have the eyes to see that then. In the moment, I just thought, oh, he must be agreeing because he's not disagreeing. So I was lying to myself. And I stayed with this, but he had no intention of having children. He admitted that after we broke up and he apologized. And he knew that they were my precious years of being fertile, and yet they were wasted. And I felt a little burned by that, but I am quick to forgive. And it's interesting because I started feeling out of step with some of my friends. And I get to this point where you realize, wait, hang on a second. Everyone else is having kids now. It reminded me when I was growing up. In fact, it reminded me of most of my life, always being an alien or an outsider. And I guess it didn't feel that different, but I recognized that my peers were doing things differently now. And so I often felt this weight of, should I be at that point too? I didn't want to feel excluded, but I always had felt excluded in my life. And I also knew that there was something inside me that there was a sense that motherhood wasn't the only path to fulfillment, although that wasn't a well-formed thought yet. So sensing there was a lack of congruence in the guy who I settled down with, I stayed with this relationship. It was probably one of my most unhealthiest relationships. And my menstrual symptoms were getting worse around this time. I would be debilitated for a couple of days every month. Not the usual little, maybe slight pangs of cramps, but literally unable to get off the couch. And I prescribed my own medication. I took codeine for a long time before they stopped making it available readily to try and cope with pain of period cramps. They got so bad. And I also was losing a lot of blood. And I would later find that I was quite anemic. And when this relationship ended, I really started to face the truth of a lot of my shadows that had haunted me for a really long time. I had been stuck in my head, and really my head was this just enormous control system to keep me safe, but really small and afraid. And I used my religious upbringing, which was quite strict. I tried to return to it in my 30s and I just couldn't. It was interesting because I thought I could get that peace that I felt back then, but I couldn't return to that ignorance that I had when I was in that religion, this new awareness I had. I couldn't get to that bliss. And this was around the time I realized I was attracting partners who mirrored my own self hatred. And this was a huge insight. And I understood that I had massive wounds to heal before I was even able to consider a family. So at age 36, I met my husband. And I think for the first time ever, I wasn't really trying to seek someone to fill a void. He just turned up at the right time. And he felt different to anyone I'd met before. There was a sense of security that he gave, a sense of steadiness and a warmth and a kindness, like an innocence, like an angelic innocence. Qualities that I really didn't know that I needed at the time. And for the first time, I guess I felt a sense of trust and security in a partner. For the first time, my late 30s. And we got married a year and a half later. And this time I actually felt like I met the one. It wasn't like me telling myself a story. It actually integrated in the right way with him. And trusting him. I never trusted a partner before, but trusting him gave me this freedom to start to relax into building a relationship with myself. And this was when I truly gave up alcohol, gave up my eating disorder. It was like the right timing. I had smoked cigarettes for 20 years and I had quit a few years prior to this, but I tried many times, but it wasn't the right timing. And when it finally was, it was effortless. And this is how I felt when I met him. It was this feeling of this is the right environment I needed to give up the battle with avoiding myself. It's like I had this safety or container to let go and stop putting my guard up, that wall around my heart. And I began to heal. I began to seek out my shadows with this kind of new level of fearlessness. I asked the universe to show me my blind spot. Just before we got married, I started to revisit the idea of having children because now it was really crunch time. And I was 38 years old. And that would be a geriatric pregnancy, absolutely. And he was open to the idea of having a family, just as I was. And we were open to whatever journey would arise, which is a nice place to be. And so I decided to do all the fertility tests again. There seemed to be nothing wrong except maybe the possible endometriosis. And I'd already had a couple polyps removed from my uterus that were causing a lot of pain, the general anesthetic, proper surgery. But I didn't feel like I wanted to get this keyhole surgery to remove the endometriosis. There was a bit of fear about that. It felt really invasive. I was scared of that. And I had this belief that if it's meant to happen, it will happen. It shouldn't be hard. I didn't want to force things. I'd just been learning about power versus force in my life from that amazing book from David R. Hawkins, Power versus Force. And I recognized the times in my life where I was using force instead of relaxing and surrendering into power. And I decided to try IVF around this time. Now, this was a hard time because this was also the time that my brother Mikey was going through the last throes of his melanoma cancer, stage 4. So we knew he was going to pass. And so I did feel like I was taking attention away from him in my journey to try and get pregnant. And I felt like my journey to get pregnant was less important, and that my relationship with the medical industry when I was going through IVF was less important than his. And so I did nullify in a way my own struggle, my own pain. And I've done that so many times in my life. I did a lot of spiritual bypassing for a very long time. And this is stuff I only realized in the last few years. And this has been the most important insight for me to heal. And I've done a lot of shadow work. And I've become a shadow work facilitator, recognizing how much I was ignoring and avoiding and denying my own pain and unable to heal because of it. But I did go down that journey for a little while, and I was really apprehensive about IVF. I felt afraid to interfere with my natural, organic bodily systems. And I remember as I was preparing for injections and hormone therapy, something inside me began to shift. And I felt like I was twisting up inside a little bit, like something wasn't right. And this was around the time that I started to learn about my heart and the fact that I had a closed heart. I'd spent years ensuring it was closed tight. So I didn't feel any pain. And I was just starting to allow my heart to open again, to come online. And as a result, my internal guidance system was coming online. And my heart was trying to tell me, no, this is also using force instead of power to try and create children. And for the first time in my life, I actually listened to my heart and to my intuitive guidance. And the night before IVF was about to start, I just said no. And I felt this huge sense of relief, like it was the right decision. I'd been operating purely from my thinking mind my whole life, closing myself off to protect myself from getting hurt. And I realized I needed to open my heart and heal. And as my heart began to open up more and more, I felt more alive, more delighted, and interestingly more connected to myself and to others. So I canceled the IVF. And it was at this point in my life as well, my late 30s, about to turn 40, that I began to understand more about myself in terms of my neurodiversity. I started to notice signs in myself that pointed to ADHD and autism. And this understanding led me to another layer of complexity in my journey. And I started to think about how this neurodivergence might impact my ability to parent and navigate motherhood. In fact, it even made me reflect on whether I could offer a child what they would need emotionally and practically, because I had enormous challenges with noise and sensitivity to certain things like activity. And I would become easily overwhelmed many times. I've been in moments where I would panic, and I actually watched my mother many times over become very overwhelmed. And I recognized that it feels, I still feel a little embarrassed to share this. This is something I'm still coming to terms with. But recognizing that I can get extremely overwhelmed and not even be able to handle my animals at home sometimes. And coming in from the world out there and sensory overload and just collapsing into a heap. it's difficult to describe this to people who see my extroverted side and think, oh, wow, she's an amazing people person. She can handle anything. No. And that's a huge part of my life that I've been really good at masking the fact that I can put on this persona of being great with people and environments filled with people. And yet I have to be so careful that I'm balanced and I have lots of time to myself. And that sensory overload, when it happens, it can take days for me to recover. And I've had absolutely many meltdowns and burnout over the years, all the way through childhood into adulthood. And so it was very validating to begin to learn about autism and ADHD. Yes, both of those things I have strong traits in. And I acknowledge that it's okay for me to be who I am and not to gaslight myself anymore, because I gaslit myself over and over my whole life. I'm so glad this stuff's coming out. And I'm not a big believer in labels. I think I would like to more embrace a world where we just accept and love each other for who we are. I don't think we have to label everything, but we don't have a world yet that fully accepts everyone unless they fit into a label, and then we feel comfortable with that familiarity of that label. And I think we've got a ways to go still. But for me, this has been a big one when it came to thinking about motherhood and recognizing that, yeah, I have some weaknesses when it comes to being equipped to deal with children. So the beauty of this is it's led me to a deeper self-awareness and self-acceptance, realizing that I can still be a whole person regardless of these labels, and that there are many ways to find a fulfilled life. Since I married my partner, we've been together for several years now, I've gone back and forth in my mind about the decision about motherhood. And doubt sometimes comes in, especially when I'm not attuned to myself, when I neglect myself. And that's something I'm really getting better at. I've been vigilantly and diligently applying myself to the discipline of checking in on myself every day, several times a day, and just going, hey, are you there? How are you doing? I'm with you. Oh, you feel that? Feel that in your stomach? That's anxiety. I've suffered anxiety my whole life, and it's fear. And I know where it comes from. It comes from childhood, a lot of it. And learning to see things through a veil of fear, through a lens of fear. I'm still resolving a lot of these old programs through shadow work, through my therapist, and through working with myself and building that relationship with myself and acknowledging and validating every tiny little moment where I feel these things like fear or sadness, guilt or shame. And just being there for myself and asking myself, what do I need in this moment? And so, yeah, I've gone back and forth about whether I should have had children. I'm letting go of the shoulds. I recognize that I grew up in a should environment, especially in religion, in control, in regulations, in systems. I've never flourished or felt free having these overhead rules because I actually really trust myself to navigate myself within harmony and balance of what nature's rules are. I hope that makes sense. But as I attune more to myself, I don't need someone outside of me or something outside of me dictating rules. I can attune to what feels in balance and in harmony and in homeostasis. And so I don't do shoulds, and I'm 44 years old, and I don't even know if I could have kids now. I'm I definitely have the signs of perimenopause as my cycle gets shorter. And it's interesting because back when I was 41, I still had an emptiness, like a yearning for something that was missing. And my body knew that too. I love how the body keeps the score. And it filled up my uterus and expanded it 2.5 times its normal size of fibroids. I had a diagnosis of multiple uterine fibroids, and that became uncomfortable, painful in my life. And when I looked deeply into what that meant, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually, it was my body trying to fill a void, a yearning that I still believed was missing. And it's been a few years integrating that and resolving the shadows that I hadn't seen yet around this belief that I was missing something. What we focus on grows. And if I felt unconsciously I was missing something, then I was growing a gap that needed to be filled up. And these fibroids went and took center stage. I won't go into the journey of what ended up happening there, albeit to say I avoided a hysterectomy and I went for a uterine artery embolization and changed a lot of things in my life around my health and mostly around my relationship with myself. And I started to meet the needs where I thought that I had to get from someone or something else. I recognized the need, the opportunity to replace force with the power of my heart, the power of loving who I am, self-acceptance, worthiness. And I learned to ask myself, am I operating from a place of fear or from inspiration, from love? And this question has helped me navigate my choice over and over and over. I ask myself this question with every big decision, not just whether I should have had children, whether I could have had children. And a lot of my decisions have been easy with this question. Is the motivation from fear? I remember thinking that when I started to get myself in knots about whether to get a mortgage or not. It's interesting. I've come to see that my biggest healing has been in accepting myself fully. It's so simple. No matter how different I might appear to others, accepting myself feels the most fulfilling. And it has a knock-on effect. When I fully acknowledge and validate who I am in each moment, and I'm there for myself, there's no void, there's no emptiness. And I'm not a mother, but I don't feel empty. And I give permission to all those around me that I connect with every day to also accept themselves. The deep connection that I feel with others. Spiritually, I recognize that feeling of unity, of oneness with the human collective. Now, I've also come to understand that feeling of motherhood has come up in my life so many times, like fleeting memories of past lives that I believe are probably happening simultaneously now. I've been through past life regression sessions, a few of those, and I've been a mother before, and I have a memory within me of what that felt like. And I feel like a mother as I heal my shadows, which I'm still doing. All those little parts of me that branching off went out across the universe come back to make me feel whole again. Again, I don't feel like a part of me is missing. And so that's the work I do with myself and my clients. I'm learning to hold space for myself and in turn, holding space for others. And interestingly, it comes full circle. I often wondered if I'm missing out, as I've heard so many mothers say, that I'm missing out on something that can never be replicated from any other experience. And I've often felt like a yearning or something is missing because I didn't get that experience, like I've lost out. But I question that now because the part of me that feels I missed out is the part of me that's learning to become a divine mother. I've witnessed how motherhood radically changes lives for the better. I recognize that it teaches a woman to become more responsible for themselves and for others, for their children. It's like a mother is forced to grow up and look beyond the selfishness of caring for herself only and to nurture and hold space for others and help them grow and mature. That's the definition of a mother. And I can be that, and I am being that. And so I recognize that I'm in this chapter of my life where I've grown up, that I'm no longer one who is just selfishly self-absorbed, but who recognizes the importance of becoming the adult and holding space for others, allowing them the safety to grow and mature and transform and awaken within themselves. And what I truly hope is to move into a level of self-acceptance where they feel whole, where they heal their shadow. And so this is the divine energy that I now see myself growing into. And I see this as tenderness. My purpose is tenderness. And I don't say that lightly. It's actually my gene key, 37, tenderness. And I see it in my work. I work with my coaching and counseling clients, but also I work with counseling students. And it's enormously fulfilling to recognize that it's my role there to be tender, to hold space, to assist them to be nurtured, to grow and mature and become more aware of their divine quality, their humanness, but also their connection to the whole. And so motherhood for me has changed its definition. And not because of convenience, but I think it's been a divine path. It's been a journey that I asked for, that I'm integrating. I'm grateful for. And I still have days where I wonder. And that's okay too. So I hope this has been helpful. Thank you.